and welcome to Ancient History in Dialogue. Today I welcome our guest, Sophia Bianchi, who has been researching at the university for about 3 years. Her main focus lies on magic, ancient curse tablets, and as well as shame and honor in ancient Greece. Last year, she held a seminar on the Papyri Graecae Magicae, one of the richest and important sources for the study of ancient magic. It's my great pleasure to welcome you here, Ms. Bianchi. I think we can start right away. Our interview today will deal with the connection between magic and demonology in the PGM. Yeah, Ms. Bianchi. The most dominant entries of the PGM are written in Greek, Egyptian, or Jewish, and can be interpreted as emblematic for the cultural diversity of Alexandria's Hellenistic period. While some of the Greek formula collections were partly written in Demotic or Coptic, a lack of Latin texts is eye-catching. In your opinion, what could be the reason for this?
One of the explanations could be that these texts were not particularly significant for those who actually spoke Latin in everyday life, and therefore it could be indicative of the fact that these texts were perhaps more likely to have been used by local people who spoke, of course, other languages than Latin, and that were embedded in different cultural, let's say, traditions and cultural contexts. So this could be an explanation.
The classical philologist and religious scholar Theodor Hopfner sees in the Papyri Graecae Magicae as documents of a religious syncretism of the 3rd and 5th century AD, since they contain Egyptian, Greek, Hebrew, Semitic, as well as Christian influences. What do you think of this thesis? Do you?
I think this question perhaps even answers nicely the first question about why there is a lack of Latin texts. So yes, syncretism. It seems to be indeed a widespread idea that the papyri, the magical papyri, do indeed mirror the demographic realities of cities and towns of the late Ptolemaic and Roman Egypt. So, and indeed, this is a phenomenon that we could label as perhaps cosmopolitan as well as syncretic in character. And this, I think, is also very nicely illustrated by all the range of deities and figures and ritual proceedings that indeed appear throughout the entire collection of the papyri. So we do have Egyptian, Greek, and Jewish, with some also Christian influences, traditions which are all mixed and adapted. So, for example, the scholar Dillman, who has indeed dealt with the the Magical Papyri quite extensively, thinks that this multiculturalism mix was likely the result of an increasing competition at that time between different ritual specialists coming from all different parts of the world, and as well as a competition perhaps between a different clientele, whose lives, of course, indeed were culturally diverse too. So nevertheless, between this syncretism idea, there is indeed perhaps a catch. It has been recently shown that, for example, in the case of the Theban papyri, they seems to reframe as well as translate traditions. So they basically extracted already known traditions, and they sort of adapt them to appeal to certain people. So yeah, there is a syncretism, but also I think we should be quite careful in the way we apply the concept of syncretism when we study the magical papyri. Yeah. So.
Okay. I have a quote here. Since it is impossible for humans as earthly mortal creatures to lift the veils of future by their own efforts, they are dependent on the help and revelation of other beings from above, which are more powerful, stronger, and more perfect, as well as far superior to them in knowledge of all that is to come. This is a quote I took from an ancient text, and it describes the connection between magic and demonology. Mm-hmm. How do you think magic and demonology can be explained? How can the connection be explained?
I study ancient magical practices, always in relation to their to a much broader historical context. Therefore, I always like to think that they have much broader implications than scholars sometimes want to acknowledge. So in relation to how we can explain, therefore, demonology and ancient magic, I think we have to start from the conditions in Roman Egypt and what was actually the context back then. And so in Roman Egypt, of course, life was quite hard and quite unfair, and especially when it came to health, there was no such a thing as we have today as a healthcare system. So people lived with a sense of physical as well as economic and social vulnerability. And so how could therefore people then cope with such circumstances? And what did they therefore use to tackle everyday problems? One approach indeed is to locate the hope to solve problems in the supernatural, and hence the magical papyri that come into place here. So, and of course, the supernatural has always been regarded as part, as an integral part of the physical world, right? And misfortune, therefore, can accordingly be explained as in terms of divine will as well as demonic behavior. And therefore, people employed various methods to identify what sources actually influence their lives. And one way of doing that is basically to manipulate these agents, these supernatural forces. To manipulate the supernatural forces, and of course, the manipulation of these forces was also to protect people against the misfortune, and protection, of course, came indeed in various forms. The well-known, I think one of the most well-known forms is the amulets. And so these amulets were especially important when it came to diseases. And in fact, diseases as well as, for example, misery were generally attributed to these demonic forces. And so to avert these powers, people therefore relied on the amulets that then they wore on bodies, on the body, like in the fingers or around the neck. And these amulets indeed came in two distinct forms. So they could have been written charms of object amulets, like, for example, the gemstones. And the gemstones, I think, are quite interesting because they show these characteres, the so-called characteres, which are usually it's basically a general term for small designs and little figurines, which there is a lot of debate about these characters and what they actually mean, because they have no apparent source in any known alphabet. The most, to give a short example, the most one of the well-known characters is the little asterisks. So anyways, these amulets that were worn indeed around on the finger, around the neck, and they were usually incised with these characters as well as images, words and symbols of power. And so these daimones were indeed very well related to internal, mental, as well as chronic diseases, and so many, of course, sought healing from magic specialists, ritual specialists, for against these forces. And these are, for example, called these are called as curative charms. Yeah, and now I think here we have to be again careful when we talk about demons, because I think our conception of demons has been influenced by the Christian view on demons. And so not all demons, of course, were bad. And across the whole corpus of the magic papyri, we do in fact find also good demons. Like I have the example of the PGM 7, which the PGM7 talks about a personal daimon. And this is interesting because it's the whole notion of the personal daimon is expressed through the words syntasis with your own daimon. Now, syntasis means connection. And in the beginning of in the beginning of the invocation of the magician greets Tyche, and Tyche, of course, often appears in the Magic Papyri together with Moira, and in Plato's Republic, we find that the Moira, for example, closely connected with the souls and the personal daimon. In fact, Plato describes this personal daimon as the guardian of a man's life. And Plotinus instead labels the personal daimon as a fulfiller of what one has chosen. And similarly, we find in Iamblichus and then in Proclus, we find even connected to one's destiny. So, of course, this personal daimon indeed seems to have been a good daimon who indeed was related to one's life, one's destiny, one's choices in life as a sort of guidance. So, yeah, and so we have, of course, to make a sort of distinction between the different demons that appear throughout the PGM. Yeah.
Some, moreover, refer to magic as a technique based on the belief in secret forces of the universe. How can these cosmic interactions be imagined in relation to the demons, and how are they expressed in the Papyri Graecae Magicae?
Yeah. This is, I think, a very, this is an interesting question, because there are different ways that in the magicians, ritual specialists, try to get in touch with supernatural forces, and by extension, with daimonists. So one way to look at the question is to understand that the reflection of a belief in supernatural forces into, of course, magical practices is, for example, well expounded in the dream oracles and in the corpus of the PGM, and of course it refers to spells in which some kind of knowledge is acquired through dreams, and of course, so there is people do not only try to get in touch with daimonists, they also try to get in touch with deities, and so, but in relation to the daimonist question, I think that if, for example, we go back to the just mentioned personal daimon in the PGM7, this, as I said, this syntasis is a term that is often used in the PGM to denote the ritual or prayer for establishing a connection between the man and the divine. And the divine, which means, of course, God, as well as the personal daimon, or even an assistant, which is very nicely called as the paredros. And of course, there is indeed quite an extensive debate about what exactly is the paredros. But let's call it good daimon for now. And the relationship with the personal daimon is, for example, internalized through a dream revelation, and another nice example also comes from PGM4, which says spell that leads over any skull. So, and it's called cup. Sorry. And it's called cup. So the magician is instructed to recite a spell to Helios in order that he may give a power over a spirit that died of a violent death, the so-called biothanatoi, which were common, were all common, especially in classical Athens with the Fictiones. They were very often invoked. So the magician in the PGM4, the magician is basically practicing a reanimation ritual so that the daimon can become his own assistant, the paredros. And of course, what does the daimon have to do? I mean, he has to help him as well as avenge people. So yeah, and this is, of course, this is one way to look at it. So this with this ritual communication that that always accompanied the reading out loud, the reciting of the text of a given text of the PGM. But another way is through all the different rather obscure words, like the voces magicae or the nomina barbara, or again even the caracteres. So these are all strategies that are indeed used in the magical papyri to get in touch with demonic forces as well as with non-demonic forces. And in relation, for example, to the voces magicae, the nomina barbara, they were thought, according to the tradition, of course, were very secret. That's why we do not particularly know what they aimed at. I mean, we know what they sort of aimed at, but we don't exactly know the specific meaning. But according to the tradition, therefore, were secret, but also very interesting. They were authentic names of deities as well as demons. So, of course, there is indeed then these other strategies. So, the trying to go beyond the boundary of the human world and get in touch, therefore, with the supernatural world through certain words or perhaps characters. Yeah, and this is also why, for example, a lot of these voces magicae were actually written. They used Greek letters because the Greek alphabet could have easily been manipulated. So, and this also perhaps even explains why a big portion of the magical papyri were written in Greek.
Thank you very much for this interview. It was very interesting. And yeah.